There once was a man who was an eyewitness to the best, most perfect life ever lived. There once was a man whose best friend was the Son of God. They worked together, they ate dinner together, they talked. I mean, it was an actual, real friendship. And this man, he literally saw miracles with his own eyes, and he heard these radical teachings, and he followed this friend, this leader who ended up changing the world forever. Fast forward a few years, his best friend's been arrested and murdered. His life is turned upside down. It's kind of a mess. But he has seen the truth. He has seen this light firsthand. And so he sits, and underneath this mysterious direction, directly from God, he writes down the story of all that he had witnessed. This is that story.
Don't you just want to listen to him more? I mean, like, I wish I had that accent. I'm so glad you're here. Well, good morning and welcome. Good morning to all of you watching on Facebook Live who just woke up from daylight savings time. I'm glad that those of you are with us. Thanks for making the time and being here. We are in part 2 of our series, Eyewitness. That's leading us all the way up to Easter. And if you missed last week, you missed part 1, you can watch any message, anytime there at our website. You can watch all the messages all the way back to the very beginning, a little over a year ago when we started Hope Church. Now, this series is built around a single idea that belief in Jesus, that faith in God isn't just some kind of leap in the dark, blind faith. I hope that it's true. It's better than that, actually. And if we're willing to hear it, there's evidence. There's actually a person, there's actually someone who was there, who saw it, who heard Jesus say these things, saw him do these things. He was an eyewitness, and he wants you to listen to what he has to say. And I think you can trust what he says and have confidence about what he says, because John, like us, wasn't easy to convince. He believed Jesus was the Son of God, and he saw him and he heard him. Now, belief, maybe for you growing up, if you're like me growing up in the church, maybe it was just, I hope it's kind of true sort of thing. Maybe you were just told just to have faith or just believe, maybe nobody ever helped you and took the time to talk with you about questions that you might have, never helped you kind of walk through some of those things and talk you into faith. And so maybe as a result of that in your life growing up, you might have had a conversation or read something or talked to someone that kind of talked you out of your faith. And maybe you're watching and maybe you're here. Or maybe you're like me, you grew up in the church and you didn't lose faith, and you still believe, but you walked through stuff in your life that was hard. Something happened or is happening maybe even right now in your life, and even though you believe, you're like, this is hard, this is messing with my faith, it's like rocking my faith, and it makes you wonder if believing and faith are even worth the time or the energy. I mean, does it even matter? Does it even make a difference? John can relate to both. He was an unbeliever and a believer who walked through really hard times, and I think he can relate to what you are feeling and what you might be going through today. But what held his faith together, what kept him believing, was what he heard and was what he saw. He was an eyewitness to everything Jesus did and said. And so no matter how good life was, or no matter how hard life was, no matter how easy life might be, or how challenging it might be, he couldn't deny that he had experienced something real. He had seen it, he had heard it, it had changed his life. And so years later now, after Jesus has died and rose from the dead, he said he saw this guy die on the cross, be put in the tomb. 3 days later, he said he saw him alive. And years later now, decades later, John is an old man. And before he dies, he sits to record his account of Jesus' life in this book we call the Gospel of John. And we have to ask, why did he write it? Why is it even there? What's his purpose in passing it on to all of us here today? And the answer is very simple. Because John doesn't expect that you're going to believe because your parents wanted you to or your grandparents wanted you to. He doesn't expect you to believe because it's what you do where you grew up, because we're from the Midwest and maybe that's what we do here. John knows this thing that's true for you and for me and for him, that real life demands real faith. Can I get an amen on that? But he also knows that it's real life and our real life problems and our real life questions that can get in the way of faith. So the thing that we need to get through this thing called life is the very thing that makes it hard to believe in God. And so for all of us who wouldn't be able to see Jesus and hear Jesus and watch him with our own eyes, and John records it for us to help all of us who will be born later and come later to not only know he was real and it was true, but and not only did he do all these amazing things, but you can have confidence in him today and you can believe in him today like I believed in him, because your faith isn't anchored in some myth or some legend. It's based in truth. It's based in history. It's credible. It's reliable. It's based on eyewitness testimony. And you can trust it. John experienced something with Jesus that changed his life. And as we journey with him in this series up to Easter, he wants us to experience that same thing with him as well. The same things that led him to faith are going to be what he shares with us. And he even says, why did I write this book? Let me tell you why I wrote this book. Jesus did some stuff. He performed signs, many signs. In fact, he did things that I don't have time to write about. They're not recorded in this book, this letter we're reading through. Jesus did things that later on he would say, if I were to sit down and write everything that Jesus did and everything that Jesus said, I suppose, these are his words, not mine, I suppose there wouldn't be enough books in the world to hold it all. But what I'm going to record for you are the things that led me to believe. Because Jesus did a lot more than I'm writing, and he said a lot more than I'm writing, but I'm writing what I'm writing for you because you can trust it and believe that, like I did, he is the Son of God, and that by believing you could have a kind of life that you can't give yourself, the kind of life that's eternal and abundant, and it comes from God. So John writes in a very intentional way to help us believe that our faith is not just faith in faith or believe in belief. It's not just, I hope it's true. It's events that really happened that were signs that showed us that Jesus was more than a man. And he was more than a man who did miracles. Behind that man who did the miracles was somebody that can change your life too. And so he records what we're going to walk through in this series and call 7 signs. Last week we talked about the first one where he turned water into wine, and these signs aren't just like miracles. Don't get marveled at the miracle and enamored with the miracle. Recognize that in the miracle it tells us something about who Jesus is, and you can trust something about him. And so as we move into the second sign, I've got a question for all of us in this room, and I want you to think about this before you answer. Is it possible for you to believe in God no matter what happens? Like, is it possible for you to believe and have faith in God no matter what happens to you, no matter what happens to the people that you love, no matter what happens around you? Is it possible to believe, even if you feel like God is not doing what you want him to do, life is letting you down, you've got problems and pain that you don't know the answers to, questions you don't know what to do with? Is it still possible to believe in spite of all of that, no matter what happens? Have you ever met somebody who believes no matter what? In spite of, what's happening around them. These are the kinds of people that no matter what goes on, they still have joy. They still have peace. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you should not be smiling, dude. Like, what you're going through, I can't even imagine why you are smiling. How are you able to even get up out of bed in the morning? You've got peace, and you should not have peace. And through whatever they go through, they've got this unshakable confidence and trust in God. Andy Stanley, a pastor that I really respect, he says these are believe in spite of people. That's what he calls them. They believe in spite of. Maybe financial problems or health problems or relationship problems or maybe whatever. Maybe you know somebody who's a believe in spite of person, a grandparent maybe, a parent, a friend. Growing up in the church that I grew up in St. Charles, Missouri, I knew a man like this, and his name was Jim Ole. Jim and his wife were about 10 or 15 years older than my parents, and so their kids were about 10 or 15 years older than me and my siblings. And I'll never forget, this family was so involved. He was an elder in the church. His kids served. Some sang on the worship team and did a lot of other things. And I will never forget when Jim Oll's daughter, I was 10 years old when the news broke in St. Charles, Missouri, that his oldest daughter was tragically and brutally murdered by her husband. 10 years old, I got a front row seat to this kind of faith. And we watched their family wrestle and struggle, as all of us would, with that kind of pain and that kind of loss and those kinds of questions. But I watched them believe and hold on to faith. They never lost faith. They never stopped believing. Instead, they trusted God more. They loved God more. They leaned into God more. And when people go through that, and we know them and we're close to them, we look at them and go, what would I do if I were walking through that, right? I mean, how would I respond? And I can tell you exactly how I would respond to that. I would be pretty ticked off at God if that happened. That might be the deal breaker for me. I mean, parents in the room, right? If something happened to our children, God, what in the world? And I don't think that I would have stayed following Jesus, believing in Jesus. How could God be good if that happened? But Jim Oll, man, this guy, no matter what happened, and growing up, and he never knew this, but growing up, I wanted to be like him. He inspired me to be, I thought he's got to be exactly what Jesus was like. I mean, that guy's got to be this close to Jesus, right? I want to be more like him. And chances are good in your life that you probably know somebody like this. And if you're a believer like me, then you probably wish that you believed like they did too. You probably wish you had that kind of faith. You kind of probably wish, like Jim Oll, that you were more like them. That's what I wanted. But listen, even if you're here and you don't believe and you're not sure what you believe, don't you still wish you believed like they did? Because they seem to have a peace and a confidence that you wish you had. And even if you're not a church person, when you encounter somebody who believes no matter what and has faith no matter what, we admire it. And even if it's not true, we wish it was true, but even if it's not true, it's still better than what we have. There's this deep and authentic joy that we can't explain and we don't have. And so today, as we talk about this next sign that Jesus did, if you ever had questions about God, questions about faith, you ever had questions without answers, maybe real problems in your life that you don't know the solutions to, and you're still in the middle of it, and it's challenging your faith and confronting your faith, and you don't know how to respond, this second sign will help you. It will help you. And even if you don't believe, it will help you. It will help you if you're struggling to believe. It will help you. If it's hard right now for you to have faith, if something happened or it's happening right now and you just can't seem to muster up the confidence in God and the faith in God, if you're in a crisis or you faced a crisis, maybe you're wondering, God, do you even care? Are you even there? John is about to introduce you to a man who can relate to your exact feelings. This guy had questions. This guy didn't know what he believed, but he was knee-deep in a crisis he couldn't get himself out of. And he had a choice to make. Trust God. There we go. I cut out again. Would he trust God? So let's pick up our story in John chapter 4. And it says John tells us that once more, Jesus visited Cana, this town in Galilee in the north of Israel, where he had turned water into wine. Now, if you weren't here last week, we talked about Jesus going to this wedding feast, this celebration, and he turned water into wine. His mom was on the receiving committee. She was responsible to help with the food and the drinks, and they ran out of wine. Big problem, right? We would all agree. And so he steps into this celebration, and he does this thing that most people at the wedding don't even know that happened. Only the servants who were working at the wedding and the disciples saw and knew that Jesus turned water into wine. And so after that, John tells us that he and the disciples and Jesus all went south from Cana down to the city of Jerusalem to celebrate the Jewish festival of Passover. That commemorates every year that time. God led the nation of Israel out of Egyptian bondage. And so they go to Jerusalem and they make sacrifices and they worship at the temple. And while in Jerusalem, Jesus does something crazy, stirs up a big hornet's nest because he goes into the temple and he sees all these people cheating people who are there to make a sacrifice, and they're selling bad lambs and goats, and they're overcharging on the interest, and they're robbing people, and it's an offense to him. And this is his Father's house. This is where they come to worship and make sacrifice for their sins. And so if you don't like Jesus, you're going to like Jesus by the end of this story, because he gets a whip. He makes his own whip, and he whips them all out of the temple. And this was a big deal. He's checking in balance those who are abusing other people, and he drives them all out. And this made big news around Jerusalem. But it also caused big problems with the people who were in charge at the temple. And so it wasn't safe for Jesus to stay in Jerusalem for very long. So that's why his base of operations was up north, away from Jerusalem. So he would go and leave Jerusalem after festivals. And so John says that after he drove all of them out of the temple, after the events of the Passover, they go back north. And on their way, they stop at an area where Jews didn't go, in the area called Samaria. And he stops at a well to get some water on the journey home. And he meets a woman, and men don't talk to women in public in this culture, and definitely Jews not to Samaritans. And he talks to this woman, and he cares about this woman, and he listens to this woman, and he loves this woman, and he saves this woman, and this woman's life is changed. She goes into her village, tells everybody about who Jesus is, and everybody in the town comes to believe that he is the Son of God. It's an incredible story. And then he leaves, and he goes back up again to Cana in Galilee, where he turned water into wine. And this first sign that he did, remember, water into wine was at a celebration. It was at a wedding. And the second one, though, when he returned there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. The second sign is not a celebration. The second sign is sadness and sickness and pain. And I think it's an interesting thing, and if you're new here, listen, I think it's an interesting thing that God, who loves you, is wanting to be involved in your life when life is good, and he also wants to be involved in your life when life is not good. Jesus gets involved in both, and I think that's something that's pretty powerful. He cares about our pain and our problems and our hurts. Now, this man was a nobleman. He's a royal official, so he was technically what we call a Sadducee. There were two groups of people in Israel. The Sadducees were the ruling class. They were the aristocrats. They were the people in charge. They had wealth and power and position. And the other group, the Pharisees, who were at that temple, who ruled over the temple, they weren't political. They didn't care about any of that. They were Jewish, strict legalists. They were teachers of the law. They were the priests. They were the ones who had the most problems with Jesus. And they didn't rule over the nation. They ruled over the temple. But the Sadducees weren't like the Pharisees at all. They weren't that religious. They didn't even believe much. They didn't care about faith. They didn't care about belief. Some scholars even think that this group didn't even believe there was a God. They were atheists. They certainly didn't believe there was a life after this life. There wasn't a resurrection from the dead. There was no afterlife, which is one of my professors in college said, that's why they were sad, you see. Hey, come on. I'll be here all day, right? Okay. So these guys weren't priests. They weren't teachers of the law. They couldn't care less about any of those things. They didn't have faith. They didn't believe. They were about power and money and position and influence. And this royal official had all of those. But all of what he had couldn't change the fact that his son got sicker and sicker and sicker. And so when this man heard, the text tells us that Jesus had arrived back in Galilee from Jerusalem, the area of Judea, he decided to go to him. Now, Capernaum, the city that this guy was living in, the royal official, was about 17 miles away from the city of Cana. And Google, my best friend and your best friend, right, who's listening to us right now. Hi, Google. Everybody say, hi, Google. Google says that it would take about 17 miles. It would take about 8 hours to walk that if you were walking that. Maybe 2 to 3 hours if you were on a horse or a bike or a chariot, maybe like this guy might have had. And so Cana's not like some, it's just the next town over. It's just down the road. It's a considerable distance away. And his son is getting worse and worse by the day, and it didn't look good. And it quickly reached the point where without some kind of miracle, without some kind of intervention, my son is going to die. And at the same time, the text tells us that this guy heard that Jesus had come back. Jesus' reputation is growing. News about him is spreading across the nation. Reports and rumors about a rabbi who was sent from God, who can do things nobody else can do, begins to spread around Israel. Everybody heard the stories about the guy who overturned the tables at the temple during Passover. I mean, he's getting a reputation. And remember, John said Jesus did a lot more things. He said a lot more things than what I have time to write in this account. So you got to understand, Jesus is becoming so famous. His reputation is really getting big. There were rumors that this guy had the power to do miracles. He could heal people, and he might be able to do the impossible for this man's son. And so when this official, who didn't take faith or belief seriously, his son falls seriously ill, him, his wife, after they exhausted all of their options, they got desperate. And that desperation led them to do something that they would have never done. He travels the long distance from Capernaum to Cana just to find Jesus. He gets his entourage together, all his guys, and I think it's fascinating that this man who didn't believe, who was a Sadducee, who couldn't care less about faith, who wanted money and power and influence, found himself challenged by the rumors that he heard about this guy, Jesus. He found himself confronted with the idea of faith. Could this guy be trusted? Could this guy do something? Would he even want to? Who is this Jesus I so keep hearing about? And here's what's incredible. This man opted to leave his dying son. Parents, this man opted, who didn't take faith seriously, chose to leave his dying son at his bedside, not knowing if this would be the last time he ever saw him alive again, in hopes of finding Jesus, who he's heard could, maybe would be able to do something incredible. That's how desperate this guy was. So he kisses his son and he says goodbye. Can you even imagine that? I don't even know if I'll see him alive again. And he travels to Cana, and when he gets there, this powerful, influential, wealthy man does something interesting when he shows up. This dignified man, when he sees Jesus, he begs Jesus to come and to heal his son, who is so close to death. The Greek here the English doesn't really give us the full weight of what that word beg mean. The Greek, the original language here, it actually doesn't just mean asking. He didn't just beg, like, come on, please, no, come on, please. What it means is he relentlessly, desperately pleaded with Jesus. Come on, parents, you know what I'm talking about? Over and over and over and over and over. Please come help my son. Forget dignity, right? Forget decorum. Forget all of the pomp and circumstance of the position. Some things, right, parents? Some things are more important than that. This is my son. Forget that I'm a Sadducee and I don't even know if I believe in anything. My son is dying, and so if you can do anything to help, please, please, please come and help. That's official. I mean, get the image in your head of his entourage, this big guy, this big to-do guy. He's on his knees, humbling himself, begging desperately for Jesus to come. This was not a normal day in the life of this man. But Jesus does something and says something interesting. And in fact, it seems downright insensitive. He says, this is how we would read it for our English translation. Unless you see signs and wonders, you'll never believe. Right? We read that in our English translation and we go, Jesus sounds like he's making an accusation, like you're bad for even asking. Like, how dare you waste my time? What are you thinking? But that's not what this means. If you understand it in the original language, you'll understand. Jesus, he's talking a little bit like Yoda here. In the original Greek, this is what it says. If not signs and wonders you see, you'll never believe. Unless, in other words, how can you be expected to take me seriously and believe in me unless you see something to believe? And it makes sense to us, right? I mean, the rumors, are they true? I haven't seen them. I don't know. I've heard some things. People are making some outrageous claims about you. And as Jesus continues in his life, he'll make more and more outrageous claims. So why should this royal official take Jesus seriously? Why should he trust and believe what he's saying and what he can do unless he sees for himself, hears for himself? And this is what I think is fascinating. If you're here and you're not a church person, I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching, I'm so glad you're watching, because nowhere are you asked to believe in belief. Nowhere are you asked to just have faith, hoping that it's true. Jesus knows it will take evidence for you to believe. He knows that it will take confidence and trust, and he's willing to show you that he is willing to earn that trust and gain that evidence and credibility. So you take him seriously. So you can see and hear for yourself. And this father is desperate for something, for someone to come and to do something to save his son. And so as Jesus says this, he replies one more time, his last effort, please, sir, come down before my child dies. Don't miss how this man of great power, who has all of what he needs at his own disposal, recognizes I can't do anything about this mess and this problem. So I'm going to humble myself, this man of great earthly authority, to the guy that I see who has some kind of an authority that I don't have. This guy, Jesus, there's got to be more to him than the miracles, more than the rumors. There's something about him. There's an authority about him. I need him to come. I need him. He begs one last time. And look what Jesus says. This is just incredible. Go. Go. Your son will live. And here's what's incredible. The Sadducee who doesn't trust or believe or have faith, the man who has the authority to take Jesus home with him by force if he wanted to, he took Jesus at his word, he trusted what he said, and he left for home. The guy who wasn't prepared to take no for an answer, whatever it takes, right? You can imagine what the wife said before the husband left, like, you are coming back here with him, whatever it takes, don't take no for an answer. If you come back here without him, you're a dead man. You know what I'm saying? Come on, moms, you know what I'm talking about? We're going to do whatever we can to save our boy. This guy's not prepared to take no for an answer. In his mind, the only option he would settle for was Jesus coming with and healing his son. But Jesus says, go, trust me. Trust me, he's going to be fine. Andy Stanley, this pastor that I really love and respect, he says Jesus was asking this man to walk home by faith, not by sight. Trust what I'm telling you, even if you don't see it. And this is where all of us live. Isn't this where you're at today? Aren't you in this same tension? You're asked to have faith and to trust and to believe in Jesus and to take him at his word, but you don't have an answer yet. You don't know what's going to happen yet. You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. You're asked to live by faith even if you can't see the end, even if you don't have an answer, even if what we want hasn't happened yet. You're asked to trust Jesus based on his word. That, my friends, is the choice of faith. And you and I can all relate to this because John saw Jesus and Peter saw Jesus. The other apostles, they got to see Jesus. I mean, for them, seeing was believing. But this man, like us, this man was the first in the history of the Gospels, the very first example of somebody being asked to trust and believe without seeing, but by hearing. And this is where all of us and everybody who was born after the first century lives. Can we trust who Jesus is based on what we've heard from others? John gives us eyewitness testimony so you and I can trust that he is who he says he is, and he can do what he promises he'll do. And this man is being asked to do a very difficult thing. Trust simply based on what Jesus said. And he had a choice, as we all do, in that moment of crisis and faith. And all of us, who have questions, and all of us who have problems that we don't know the answers to, don't know what to do about the resolution yet, we get this because real life, as I said, demands real faith, right? But it's our real life problems, our real life questions that get in the way of that. And we are always in this conflict of, can we trust God with what we're going through? And that's what makes what this man does so incredible. He chooses to trust Jesus simply based on what he hears. He chooses to walk away from the only person who could do anything to save his son, and instead of forcing him to come home by force with him to Capernaum, he just trusts Jesus will do what he said he will do, and that in Jesus' hands, this is fine. So he goes. Not in a hurry, not worrying. And while he was on his way, his servants while he was still on his way, not knowing what he was going to find when he gets home, not knowing what he would be facing when he got home, not knowing if the wife would be so angry that she really did live up to her threat because their boy was dead. He didn't know what he was walking back into. On his way, his servants, some others, met him with the news that his boy was living. Not just living better, getting better. And when he inquired to them, when was the time that my son got better? They said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. There's details here because this isn't just made up. These are credible stories, eyewitness accounts. And I can imagine as he heard the servant saying this, it's like the hairs on the back of his neck and his arms stand up and a chill runs down his spine because he realizes, the text tells us that this was the exact time at which Jesus had told him, your son will live. And so when he gets home and he shares the rest of the story, his whole household believed in Jesus. And wouldn't you? That's too good to be true. I mean, you got to see, of course we would believe. I mean, who wouldn't believe after seeing that, hearing that, and putting the pieces of the story together? But what's amazing to me is that this royal official believed before he saw. Believed before he saw. He chose faith by hearing, not by seeing. And John says this was the second sign Jesus performed. It's a pretty incredible moment. And it sets the stage for all of us who live today after that first century who saw and knew Jesus. And today, you're being asked to trust Jesus and to believe in Jesus even if you can't see the answer yet. Even if we haven't seen happen what we want to have happen. You're asked to trust him based on the testimony of others. And like this official, like this royal official, we who are here today all experience life, don't we? Whether it's good or it's bad or it's hard or it's easy, and life can leave us feeling like this man, desperate. I mean, we all face things. You face things. You are facing things right now bigger than you, scary. And you feel, when you look at them and you stand in opposition to them, you feel powerless to face them, to fight them, to fix them. And when we're desperate like that, that's when we're faced with a choice. We know we can't do anything about it, so what will we do with it? We're confronted with what we think Jesus can do. Will God come through? Can we trust him? This man faced his own son's sickness and death, and he had to wrestle after he could do nothing to fix it and make it better. Maybe Jesus can. Maybe you can relate to that feeling of helplessness. And that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness can make us angry. It can make us feel bitter. And it can make us hate God and walk away from God because what we wanted to happen didn't happen. It didn't get better. It got worse. But John wants to caution us. He wants us to see how in our moments of desperation, in our moments of powerlessness, you can turn to Jesus and trust him because not only does he care when you're here, he cares when you're here. Despite the pain, despite the problem, despite the crisis, this could actually lead you closer to God. In the circumstances and the crises that you and I face, you and I have a choice to make. Will we trust God? Will we lean into faith? Will we choose to believe even though we can't see it? But we trust it because we hear it, because we know God loves us. We know God is with us. We know God is working everything together for good. And in the end, even if we don't understand, we don't like, and we don't agree, that it will be better than if we had had it our way. We can trust him with it. Are the things that we hear about this Jesus true? Are the stories and the rumors true? Will we realize in our desperation that though we are powerless, God is not? And out of his love for us, he sent us his son. And the rumors about him, they are true. And the stories about him, they're not myth. They're not legend. They're real. Holiness has hands now. The Son of God became flesh now. The Helper is here, and he's here to help you. If you know you're powerless, and if you know that what you're facing is bigger than you, you are helpless, but the Helper has come. So faith allows you to see that the most powerful one has come to walk with you through this to the other side. And in the real life problems that we all face that get in the way of real life faith, the problems can make faith hard. But here's what you need to know, like this man, faith, greater faith, won't find you some accidental thing. Poof, there it is. You go find it. Jesus took the first step. He came to us, but he honors your free will. When we realize that it's not going to just show up in our life and show up in our problem and show up in our pain, we've got to choose it. We've got to pursue it. We've got to seek it. We've got to go after it. This man was so desperate. He knew he couldn't do anything. He was willing to do whatever it took. And he trusted Jesus. He chose to see if Jesus was maybe what he heard about. He didn't wait. He didn't sit back and wait for faith to find him. He chased after it until he found it himself, until he found Jesus himself. What about you? What are you walking through right now? And what are you doing with it? Because a lot of us can sit in our pain and in our problems and hurt and get angry and call God names and say all the things, and we can let that emotion and those feelings drive a wedge between us and God, as if, God, you should show up, you should do something. Aren't you who you say you are? Can't you do all these things? And we can wallow in our pain, all the while realizing that that very pain, if we will allow it, can drive us to a greater faith, drive us to a deeper understanding of God's grace and love. Because the same thing that sends one person far from God is the same thing that sends another person closer to God. It's your choice that makes the difference. But this is what faith looks like. You're being asked to walk by faith because of what you hear from an eyewitness. Just like that man that day was asked to trust what Jesus was saying. And you're asked to trust because you trust that God does care. You trust that God does love you. And that he will step into the pain of life just like he wants to step into the celebrations. He loves you. And that's what I love about Jesus. He's with us when we're up and he's with us when we're down. But faith, isn't faith much harder when we're down here? Isn't it harder? So this is where we lose faith. This is where people abandon hope. This is where people unfollow and disbelieve. And John would warn you because John knows what it feels like. John did. He didn't believe. After believing, he unbelieved, and then he followed, and then he unfollowed. And then he saw his Savior who died alive again, and he believed. John has been up here, and John has been down here. And when he's writing this gospel, don't think that he's writing in the best of days. No. Like Dickens, it was the worst of days. I mean, John was writing, he's the last remaining apostle alive by this point, years after the resurrection. All his buddies, all his friends have been killed. The Romans have destroyed his nation and sent his people into slavery. The early church was being persecuted, and the martyrs were just, tallying up more and more every day. John had a target on his back. Life was not easy for John. How could John have faith here? How could John trust Jesus here? Simple. Because he saw with his own eyes and he heard with his own ears, and it changed everything. Jesus was what gave John real faith to get through real life. And today, you're being asked to walk by faith in your life. You're being asked to walk by faith when you go home today, not by sight. You're being asked to walk by faith back into that marriage, not by sight. You're being asked to walk by faith back into work tomorrow morning, not by sight. You're being asked to walk by faith into that health situation, into that problem. You're being asked to trust that God is good and that God is with you. And even if you can't see it and you don't know what to do about it, he is still there. And he is so good. And he loves you. Trust him. Just like that royal official, trust me. Trust me. You're being asked today, and that's a big ask, I think, for some of us, especially if we've gone through some of the things that maybe you've gone through over 20 years as a pastor. I know people go through what we go through. Trust me before you see what I will do. This is what faith looks like, friends. It's easy to see the miracles. It's easy to be enamored with what Jesus can do. So many were, but John says, when it got real and it hit the fan, like we looked around, where did everybody go? And then there were the ones, that faithful remnant. I still believe. I still trust you. And this is the story of all of our lives. This is where all of us live. This is the choice you and I have to make every single day if we follow Jesus. It's not all up here, is it? That's easy faith. Real faith. None of us were alive to see Jesus, to hear him talk. We have to go off the testimony of those who did. That's why, and Jesus knew that his apostles would write this account. He knew this would happen. John would encourage all of us to believe, not because I saw it, I heard it, but it's credible, it's real. The evidence is objective, it's verifiable, but it's also the best response to who I knew him to be. You got to understand, he was more than a miracle worker. He was more than a man. He was more than a great philosophy to embody and live your life after. He was the Son of God. There was a man, the man behind the miracles. That's the guy I believe in. I take him at his word because I trust him, not just with my life, but with my soul, with my son's health. And if he trusted, and this official trusted, you're being asked to trust. And unless Jesus is who he says he is, and then John says he is, then there's no reason to believe. But apparently, they found reason to believe. I mean, what if what happened in John's life? What if what happened in this royal official's life? What if what happened in their lives happened in your life? What if something miraculous happened? What if something supernatural happened in response to whatever it is that you're facing right now? What if it happened in your marriage as you're praying for a better marriage, or in your family, or in your health? What if it's in your finances or in your job? What if all of a sudden the doors open and hallelujah, a miracle has happened? Well, chances are good you're going to have faith. Chances are good you're going to see the goodness of God. Jason, if God did that, I'd believe. But what if it doesn't happen? What if God has a different plan than what you're asking for? What if instead of things getting better, it gets worse? What if the worst happens like my friend Jim Ohl? Would you still believe? No matter what, can you still trust in spite of, is God still good? I mean, my friends, this is what real faith looks like. That's what walking by faith looks like. It's not walking by sight and feelings. It's by following Jesus because we love him. Listen, no matter what we walk through, we just trust him. And if you walk by faith like that, not by how you feel and not by what you see, listen, if you walk by faith like that, eventually, even though we weren't there to see Jesus and hear Jesus, like John was, like this official was, if you walk with that kind of faith in your life, if you believe and trust him, if you stay faithful to him, no matter what happens, then you will see him on that day when this life ends. You will see him face to face. And everything that you went through, all the good, all the bad, all the ups, all the downs, the celebrations, the sadness, the sickness, the pain, the problems, you will see Jesus. And in that first moment, everything you endured in trusting him and having faith in him, the moment you see him will be worth the wait. It will be so, so worth it. That's faith. If God never did another thing for me, would I still love him? Isn't Jesus and what Jesus was willing to do enough for me to say to God, I trust you? He who did not spare his own son, he was willing to go all in, man, to show you how much you mean to him. That's faith. That's why John's writing this gospel. I saw it, I heard it, you got to trust it too. One day you will. And Jesus knew that one day through his apostles, many would come to believe, because every generation after that first generation only has come to faith by what they've heard. And Jesus says, listen to what he says to his disciples the night before the cross. You've seen me, guys, Peter, John, you've seen me. So I know that it's easy for you to believe. You've seen me walk on water. You've seen me miraculously feed 5,000 people. I mean, you've seen some stuff. But if you can walk by faith like this today in your life, I'm going to tell you something. Jesus has said you are more blessed than the apostles. because you have believed even though you haven't seen. That's cool. Will you live by that no matter what kind of faith, that in spite of kind of belief? Will you choose to walk by faith in your life today? That's the question that you have to answer. And I pray that you would. I hope that you would. Because when you do, I know you'll experience the same kind of peace and joy and hope and power that only can come from God. You can get through things that you couldn't get through on your own because real life demands real faith, but it's oftentimes our real life problems that get in the way of that. And maybe today you'd say, Jason, if Jesus would do for me what he did for that guy, then I would believe, but you don't understand what I've walked through. You don't understand. If he does that, then I'll believe. But what if he doesn't? To walk by faith, you want to know, before I pray for you and we get out of here, you want to walk by faith? You come to Jesus for who he is, not for what you can get from him. Not for what he can do for you, but because you see through the miracles, you see through the teachings, you see through it all, a God who loves you, and you're willing to trust him and love him back, even if you don't understand everything, even if you don't like what God chooses to do, even if you don't agree with it. That's what faith looks like. It's trust in who he is, not only what happens. And listen, would you stand with me, because this is the thing that I think helps me. Maybe it'll help you. You don't know who's watching you. You don't know how your choice in this thing that you're walking in right now, you don't know your response and how that might inspire somebody else to believe. Jim Ohl never knew I wanted to become like him. He never knew his joy and his peace inspired me to my core to be more like him. He didn't know that. He just woke up every day and he made the choice to trust in Jesus. And I don't know, maybe it's a spouse or a parent or a child or a friend, a coworker. Maybe your choice to believe and trust in Jesus in the middle of the pain that you're in right now is exactly what will help them find faith. But I know this, it will change your life if you walk by faith. It'll set you free. It'll give you strength you can't give yourself and hope you can't give yourself. And John wants to give you that and help you with that. And his name is Jesus. So Lord, we come together right now before we leave and go about our day. If we're here and we struggle to know who you are or what we believe about you, but maybe today we recognize in our life we can't do it on our own. It's bigger, our mess, our problems, all of it. We need a Savior who loves us. Jesus, that is your name. That is who you are. And if you are here and you would just be willing to believe, willing to say, I accept and believe that you are who John says you are. You're the Son of God. And I need you to forgive me of my sins. I need you to cleanse me and change my life. He promises to change and save you if you just believe. And if you're here and you are a follower, you do believe, I pray that whatever you're walking through, God would give you strength to endure, strength to hold fast, strength to hold on to confidence and trust in him. No matter what, you would be the kind of person who believes and inspires those around you with the kind of joy, the kind of peace, the kind of hope that you have. It's not based in this life. It's based in a life that only God can give. So Jesus, help us to know what to do with what we've just heard. Give us courage and wisdom to do it, even if it's hard. In Jesus' name we pray.